Hey, welcome back to another Black City coffee vlog. In this video, we're going to talk about the roast curve. So, I don't want to let me preface this, I'm not going to get too into the weeds with it. You can do that on your own. I think what would be cool is, because I'm getting a lot of questions about it, kind of like really specific questions, I think it might be helpful for me to just go over my general understanding currently right now, being a roaster with about less than a year of experience on what I would call a legit roaster, which is my Mill City Roaster 1 kg model. Okay, Mill City Roasters has a really in-depth, heavy video on the S-curve. I'm going to try to dumb that down because I think that's why people are asking me to explain what the curves are about. My eyes twitching like crazy right now trying to explain this. Okay, this blue curve that you see here is the bean temperature. This is the profile of the bean that we're following through the roast. You have other parameters that influence this bean as it goes through all the phases of the roast. Overall, there are 3 phases to this roast. In the beginning, we call that the drying phase. We call that green to yellow. It's going from green to yellow. That's phase 1. In the middle, we have the mid phase, also called the nameless phase. Maillard phase is, to me, the trickiest part in the roast because you have to manage the heat in a way that is not too long and not too short, and that can allow the coffee to develop all of its great nuance and flavor. If it's too short, it becomes too sour and tart, too acidic to where it's not pleasing. If it's too long, it's what people call, maybe sometimes they use this word kind of loosely, like baked. All of the nuance gets sort of like mellowed out and flat. There's no zing to it anymore. And what we really want in a middle phase is just right. Okay, and then we have the last part of the phase of the roast, which is called, I don't know, the roast development phase or something like that, but that's a really weird name too because the whole time you are roasting it. So we'll just call it the 3rd phase or the final phase, or I think I've even heard it called the finishing phase because you're finishing, like you've developed all of your nuance and chemical reactions in a middle phase or the Maillard phase, and then at the end you're deciding whether you want to call it light or city plus, full city plus, Vienna, French, Italian, right? So in the end, I would call that finishing. I kind of like that word, the finishing roast, or I could just say the end, that's better. First, middle, and end. That's easy. Okay, so those are the 3 phases of the roast curve, or the total roast development time. Overall, when you're roasting light, you're probably going for 10 to 11 minutes tops total on the roast time there. For a full city or a medium roast, maybe you're going 11:30 to about 13:30 or something like that. And then 13 and above, I think that's pretty safe bet to call dark roasted coffees. Okay, so those are the kind of time parameters at which you can mark yourself. Again, there's always going to be exceptions to the rule of what I illustrate here. But really, and that depends on the type of coffee that you're roasting. Some coffees, they definitely don't react to the roast process the same way a natural would, a washed would, a honey would, or a double washed, right? So depending on the process, the type of coffee, that can change the whole thing of this roast. Not too drastically, but it can change it, okay? Now let's dive in a little bit deep and break down each section or each phase, these 3 phases at a time. The first phase, the drying phase, which we're going from green to yellow, we'll start here. So typically, let's just say we're going to charge this coffee or drop the beans from the hopper, go into the drum. It's called a charge, and we charge this at a certain temperature. For this example, we're going to charge it at 400 degrees. So we charge the coffee, the beans drop down into the drum, and they're cold while the drum is hot. While it starts rotating, the heat starts to kind of it's like this, like super hot drum, cold beans. As once they charge, we're trying to get them to be like that, to be kind of like the same temperature, right? To catch up with each other. And that's what you see here, this little turn in the curve, this blue curve, which is what we call turning point, TP. I make that in my notes. And that's just how I first learned. Turn around, turning point, whatever. So we mark this event, we call these events, say probably around like 2 minutes, 2 minutes 10, 2 minutes 15, depending on how slow or fast from the roast before or the roast after, we can call this early or late. Now this information matters in terms of, you trying to roast something consistently. If those numbers are always off by say like 5 seconds or so, something is not right. Something is amiss in your routine, okay? And I think a lot about roasting coffee is about comfortability. So if you can get comfortable with every one of these little processes, all of these links in the chain, and you can kind of pinpoint, oh, the turning point was late right there, or oh, the turning point was early there. Maybe I'm a little hot or something like this. Is my charge really 400? Whatever. You can start to follow the breadcrumbs and find out what's good and what's wrong with your roast. And now we're really starting to like dry out the coffee. We're gonna let this like ride. To me, when I'm in dry phase, I actually do what we call, this would be kind of like maybe too much information, but a 1 minute soak. So for example, the 1 minute soak is for certain machines. Not all machines should be doing this, but in my case, what was recommended to me, I'll heat the machine up to like 420 and then let it come down. I'll turn off the heat, turn off the ignition, turn off the heat, and let it come down to 400 if I'm going to charge at 400. So I'm coming down to temperature. I charge the beans, boom, they drop in there, and then everything's off, right? And then I wait 1 minute because it's soaking up all this energy. And then after a minute, I watch on the timer, I turn the ignition and the heat back on to full power. Typically, that's what I do. And that's what we call a 1 minute soak. And we do the 1 minute soak because for whatever reason, I forget now what the nuance of this decision and this recommendation is, because the size of the machine and the drum and even how much power I think the machine has, it's almost as if it's too much power. So you need to let things kind of like mellow out, or else you'll scorch or singe or kind of like sear the beans. It's like too much heat. It's like, it's such a fine line of like, yes, we need a lot of heat, but we don't want to burn it. But we want to have a nice first rolling crack and everything, but we don't want to burn it. So it's really this challenging way of managing heat. And for a roaster, you really only have the manipulation of a gas valve. You're not like, well, for me anyway, right? So it can become very nuanced. You're just turning this valve, trying to handle this heat very carefully. And my machine has a lot of power, so like 20,000 BTUs, okay? All right, so that's, sorry, side note, that's the 1 minute soak that I do. So we're turning around, and now the bean is starting to pick up a lot more energy, a lot more heat, right? So now we see this line coming up. And all the while, we're watching the sight glass, we're checking the trier to see where it goes from green to yellow. When you call yellow, what's been nailed into my brain is like, there is no green present. No green present, then you call yellow. So if it so happens that you have some like little like orange or tanner beans in the sight glass, because every bean's a little different, right? That's okay. Or not that it's okay, but that's, that's how you're gonna call yellow, all right? So that's how I've been trained, I guess, and that's how I do it. So once we hit yellow, we're probably around 4 minutes to 5 minutes. In my case, in my experience, the way that I've been doing things with the 1 minute soak, I hit green to yellow transition, or I just call it yellow in my notes. Probably around like 5 minutes, sometimes like 5 minutes 10. That's when I hit green to yellow. Okay, so from there, with my machine, like I said, everything's going to be a little different. I crank my air up to about medium, a medium setting. which on the dial is like 60, I think. 60 or 70, I forget. And I let that ride for like 30 seconds. And then if I feel like I need to, then I will address the fuel. And I'll probably come down to like 2. My max on my machine is 2.5 kPa. Okay? So now, after we've hit yellow, we've also entered into the middle phase, the Maillard phase, the nameless phase, the middle phase, okay? And during this time, what I've been taught, is like you want to get a good like 40% of the total roast development time during this. So you don't want to hit first crack too early, and you don't want to hit it too late, like I said, right? So you're trying to manage the heat and the air during this time, and all the while, I haven't even addressed your rate of rise, but your rate of rise should always be descending. It shouldn't be going like woo, like this, because then it's going to do a lot of weird funky things to your coffee, which you're just going to have some coffee that's just not going to taste as nuanced, and you're basically ruining the origin flavors of the coffee if you have an ROR going like this. After you navigate the middle phase, you'll start to hear some outlier cracks in the coffee because it's about to kind of like explode, you know, like a popcorn. So typically you're gonna see that around 8 minutes, 9, something like that, if you're doing a typical roast for preserving origin flavor. Okay, so around 8 minutes to 9 minutes in there, if you've managed your heat correctly. So if it's a little later and that's your goal, then cool. You've now entered into first crack. So first crack, you have the first crack of the beans just like, you know, going off, sounding like little popcorn. Sounds like popcorn legit. What I do, I'll crank the air up to high, not maxed out, but a high. And then I'll let that ride for a good minute. I haven't touched the heat yet. And then after a minute, I know I'm gonna get a little flick. So what I've been trained to do was to avoid that flick, and so to lower the heat about a minute in. So I'll lower the heat, and I'll also crank up the air a little bit more and just see. And I'm just kind of like going back and forth between sight glass, the trier, the data, what I'm thinking, blah blah blah. And then I will let that just kind of like ride out. So at first you're gonna have a nice strong rolling crack if you've managed your heat correctly, and it's gonna be popping off and everything, and then it will start to like quiet down. And then if you were to keep going, like maybe you didn't touch the heat, or you're planning to go for a second crack, that can happen too, and it's much quieter. And and I have heard it before on the 1 kg, but only when I was like doing my seasoning roast. So I haven't really hit second crack in a long time, probably not since like my hot top days. And it's a really quiet sort of crack, like this. So I don't know, I can't imitate it, but that's how it is. But usually after that, I'll make note of that event and say it's around 8 minutes 30. So I'll be like, okay, now I'm going to develop it. It's a weird term, but I'm going to develop it for 2 minutes, because I want to drop it at a city level, right? Maybe 2 minutes or so. So that'll be always my plan. Going in, I'll have a plan and be like, I'm going to drop it at 2 minutes, okay? 2 minutes plus or post first crack. Even though I have this plan, I still want to check the sight glass, still want to check the trier, and look at the development of the bean myself and be like, and smell it and all this stuff and be like, yes, let's call this city. And boom, then I drop the coffee. Drop the coffee meaning like it's done. I open the door, the coffee drops out into the cooling tray, and it starts to cool down, rapidly cool down, okay? So that would be like a typical city roast, what you would typically see in a normal behaving coffee bean in a coffee roaster, in a drum roaster specifically. It's kind of really complicated. I would recommend, if you are going to get into the nuance of coffee, this is a very expensive book. I mean, did it really help me? Is it worth it? I think that's what people will ask. Is it worth it? I don't know. That's hard to say. I was not an expert after reading this book. but I love that I invested in it, and that I can always kind of refer back to it. I can 100% say that having this book is not the biggest reason of my success or non-success in roasting. So that's why I wouldn't like wholeheartedly recommend it. I think it's a great tool to have, but it's really up to you and how you are going to use it. I think I'd be much more confident saying your number one best tool is your own thirst for knowledge and your own ambition to learn, like your own learning curve, right? So when I picked this up, I skimmed all of these parts. Like I went straight to here, the progression of a roast. And when I was reading it, I didn't know what the hell he was talking about because I had no idea. It's great for me to go and roast a little bit, put in some time, learn a bunch of other things from some other people, learn from just failing, and then I can pick this up again. I'm like, yeah, I know what you're talking about here. I know what you're talking about here. And now I'm ready to receive it. So I would say if you do buy this book and you're new, know that it's not going to make you an automatic expert and may give you another level of understanding in your roast. But I think it's just going to take time and experience and failing a lot, and feedback from other people, like real people, unbiased feedback, and just a thirst for knowledge and a passion to learn, to get better. This is cool as a tool, but it's a really small part of the pie, the puzzle, in your journey to learn coffee roasting. There's so much great stuff on YouTube too, and that's free. So I wouldn't feel bad. Like, you should not feel bad if you cannot afford this. Like, if you're not down to spend $45 for a book, don't feel bad about it, right? Like, do the best that you can with everything that you can get access to. And there's so much. There's really so much. And then don't be afraid to just go out and do it and write down your own how-to guide. I did that for the hot top because I was like, I don't know if this is right, but everything that I read online is just very unclear. So I'm just going to make my own guide, and then I did. I hope that was helpful. I hope it gives you a little bit of insight, but that's a very general idea of what the S-curve is. He even talks about here the illusion of the S-curve. You know, don't get too hung up on it as well. They're all tools to make your coffee taste better, but what matters is in the cup. And do you like what you're drinking? Okay, that was a long video. I'll see you guys next time. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more stuff like this. We'll see you. Bye.